these non-base funded projects.
I'm back to Primitive Organic Garden today, looking at some potato plants that I planted about a month ago. Potatoes can be very challenging in the South. They don't like our humidity, and our seasons for potatoes are also incredibly short. Potatoes are very picky plants in terms of temperature. They will not tolerate a frost, and most potatoes don't do well under 40 Fahrenheit. At the same time, they don't like any temperatures above about 70. So they do really well in places that have cool summers. They also do okay in places that have fairly warm winters. So like Florida can do potatoes in the winter because it rarely drops below 40 in some parts of Florida. And in places like, Maine and up north, Washington, Idaho, they can do potatoes in the summer if they don't have a whole lot of days above about 70 or 75. The problem in a place like coastal South Carolina is that we go from 25, 30 degree temperatures in February to 100 degree temperatures by April. So you can't plant potatoes before about the middle of March here. You're still having frosts. And then, the potatoes only have from March to maybe May to grow before the temperatures get too hot for them. You can also do fall crops, which I'm hoping turns out a lot better this year than my spring crop. My spring crop was pretty good, but in the fall, we have temperatures well into the 90s through October. Then we might get a frost by the middle of November. So again, that window for growing potatoes is really, really short. But I kind of want to talk about the resilience of potato today. I'm quite surprised about how hardy some of the plants are. So you're probably used to seeing seed potatoes that are about the size of a tennis ball, maybe a little smaller. And so I harvested a bunch of my potatoes in April and May, and I saved quite a few of the potatoes for fall planting, which was hard to do because my house is 85, 90 degrees in the summer and humid. But I kept the potatoes in the dark in front of the window air conditioner, so they got cold air blowing on them all day. And most of them were still pretty good and firm. Even though I harvested them in April and May, they were still good enough to eat well into September. And now they're starting to kind of sprout. So these potatoes here are seed that I saved from the spring. And these are things that I planted. But I've also had some volunteer potatoes, which really surprised me. This is the first year that I've grown potatoes, and when I planted them in the spring, I planted them mostly in containers. And then around the end of August, early September, I started seeing potatoes popping up all over the garden in random places where I had never planted them before. I thought, this is kind of weird. How are potatoes just popping up? I harvested them all. Most of them were in pots, and I flipped the pots over and get all the soil out and get all the potatoes out. Well, it turns out that squirrels have been moving around tiny little potatoes and pieces of potato and burying them, I guess like they do acorns and pine cones. So squirrels have actually propagated potatoes for me. I thought I was harvesting all the potatoes. Turns out squirrels got in there before I harvested, or either I missed some of the really small ones when I was harvesting, and squirrels moved them around. So again, you're probably used to seeing seed potatoes that are about the size of a small tennis ball. But potatoes can be much smaller than that. These are all the size of nickels. And every single one of these has sprouted. And even though this potato is not much bigger than an acorn, it is capable of growing a whole new plant that can make regular sized potatoes. I had one of these volunteer in a container where I had some Brussels sprouts planted, and one of these little tiny potatoes right here, the size of an acorn, made potatoes the size of footballs, which is really weird to me. I can't fathom how something this tiny with so little energy content can make a plant that can then make a potato the size of a football. But I guess it's because all this little tiny acorn thing has to do is make a sprout, and then that sprout puts out roots, and those roots go into the soil, and then it puts out leaves, and those leaves soak up all the sunlight. So it really does not take much at all. So these are the ones that I probably missed this year. When I was harvesting my potatoes, I might not have noticed some of these little tiny things, and I reuse soil and reuse pot and mix and reuse compost. So I might have spread some of these little tiny ones around without realizing it, but I know squirrels did a good bit of it. But anyway, so I just showed you some of the potatoes that I planted. There's also some over here that I planted. These are all fall potatoes I planted at the end of August, early September. I got some in this gigantic 50-gallon pot. I got one over here in the pepper and okra patch. There's a couple in fabric pots here. The roly-polies, the pill bugs, have been eating holes through the potatoes, which is really disappointing. Roly-polies, pill bugs are a very serious pest because my area is so wet. And even though I don't water these plants, and even though roly-polies are supposed to just be decomposers, they will attack living plants and put holes through your potatoes. But anyway, those are the ones I planted. And then I found one over here that I guess like a rat had chewed through. So this is my like junk pile next to the porch. I came out here one day and there was a potato. I said, that doesn't make any sense. The thing's already rooted into the ground now. I don't know what I'm gonna do about it. I guess I could try to dig it up. But it's pretty well rooted down here. But yeah, I mean, a rat chewed a hole through this, and it still sprouted this giant plant here. That's what I mean by resilience. There's not a whole lot of plants where a piece of a plant can fall into a junk pile and have a rat chew through it, and then it decides to sprout into a whole new plant. That's pretty wild. So that's gonna go in this container here, and it's gonna get covered in soil, and I don't know if we'll have time to make potatoes before frost comes, but that's pretty cool. But anyway, so I showed you these tiny ones that are probably all over the place because squirrels buried them everywhere. We're gonna see what we get out of these. So again, these are the potatoes that I planted from full tubers, and then these are the tiny little ones that are responsible for all the volunteers. So these were all volunteers from the acorn-sized potatoes, and I'm gonna take this and empty it all out and see what we get. Yeah, he looks real mad. So we're about to see if our acorn-sized volunteer potatoes that the squirrels moved around actually yielded anything. They may or may not have yielded anything. I see one so far. Tiny little nothing. And that's the thing about volunteers, you never really know what you're gonna get. Oh wow. Okay, well, something got into there. Probably roly-polies. That's a pretty decent sized one. Again, I didn't plant these are volunteer potatoes. So anything I get is, I guess, free. Probably gonna have these for Sunday dinner with some salmon patties and okra and green beans from the garden. See, these are the tiny ones that are easy to miss. You know, if I'm just harvesting in here and I don't see one of these, and then I reuse the soil, that's why I think I had some of the volunteers. The squirrels didn't do all of it. They did some of it. I just wish they didn't have these little roly-poly holes in them. Look how tiny this one is. Here's another one that's easy to miss. If you don't harvest that and you don't realize it's in here and you reuse that soil, it's gonna sprout. There's another really, really tiny one. Looks like this one rotted. Probably got eaten by roly-polies. Well, that's a pretty meager harvest, I would say. But again, I didn't plant these. They just popped up as volunteers. So anything I get, I suppose I should just be thankful for. The ones I actually planted, I'm thinking will probably yield a little bit better. Yeah, so to recap, one of these tiny little acorn-sized potatoes volunteered, and the return on it was this. So in terms of numbers, one produced 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. One produced 16 tubers. But in terms of weight, this tiny little thing right here doesn't weigh anything because it's the size of an acorn, but it probably made 2 pounds of potatoes. So we'll have to tune in a couple months and see what this rat-eaten volunteer from the junk pile ends up producing. And we'll also tune in and see what these over here end up producing. And I'm hoping to get some massive yields out of these because they're in a 50-gallon pot. But yet to be determined. Thank you all for tuning in to my silly little potato video. There's one more volunteer over here that's not nearly ready to harvest, but this is another. So I put all this soil in this bucket about 3 weeks ago, and I did not see a single potato tuber in here. I'm guessing a squirrel must have buried it in here. I was trying to root grapevines in this pot, and the grapevines looked like they died, and then this random potato plant that I didn't plant popped out of the bucket. So we'll see what kind of yield this one makes. That's the other volunteer that I got right now. And all these back here are ones that I actually planted, which do look a little bit healthier, to be honest. The volunteers look like kind of skinny, scrawny plants, but these that I actually planted from big tubers I saved look like they're doing a little better. But tune in a couple months and we'll see what we get.